There are people who are born to live quietly, and there are people who are born so that quiet can never last. Before the name is spoken, before the battles are remembered, there is a feeling that must be understood. A feeling of standing on your own land and knowing that your future is being decided somewhere else. A feeling passed down through generations, carried in the body more than in words. Along the great river, where the water remembers every footstep that ever crossed it, a people lived with patience. They traded, they farmed, they raised children who learned early that strength did not always announce itself loudly. But patience has a limit, and dignity, once pressed for too long, begins to harden into something else. This is not a story about conquest for the sake of glory. It is a story about what happens when a people realize that silence has become dangerous. When waiting politely begins to feel like disappearing slowly. There comes a moment in every community's life when the question can no longer be avoided. Do we bend a little more just to survive another season? Or do we stand, even if standing brings risk, loss, and judgment? The elders feel it first. The weight of unfinished promises. The sense that the ground beneath them is no longer secure. The young feel it next, though they cannot yet name it. They sense that the world is watching them, measuring them, deciding how small they are allowed to be. This story begins in that space, in the long breath before action, in the heavy stillness before a choice that cannot be undone. Because there are times when history does not arrive with thunder. It arrives quietly, asking a single question and refusing to leave until it is answered. What happens if we do nothing? What happens if we choose safety over dignity? What happens if we allow others to decide what our land, our faith, and our future are worth? The man at the center of this story did not wake up one morning dreaming of empire. He did not seek greatness as a title to be admired. He was shaped by the same fears, the same pressures, the same inherited wounds as his people. What set him apart was not ambition alone, but the moment he understood that someone would have to carry the burden of saying no. No to being managed, no to being diminished, no to being remembered only as a people who waited too long. This is not yet the story of what he did. It is the story of why doing nothing was no longer an option. Listen to this story until the end, not to judge the choices made, but to understand the cost of standing upright when the world would rather you kneel. Because this is not only the memory of one man, it is the echo of a decision that still speaks to those who refuse to disappear quietly. Gao was more than a city. It was a memory that breathed. Long before empires were named and borders were argued over, Gao stood beside the river like a witness that never slept. The water carried gold dust from the south, salt from the desert, and stories from every direction. Merchants passed through, scholars paused to listen, and elders watched carefully, knowing that places like this were never allowed to remain unnoticed for long. It was on this land that Sunni Ali was born. He came from the Sunni line, a family accustomed to responsibility rather than comfort. His father ruled not as a legend, but as a man holding together something fragile. Power in Gao was not inherited, like a crown polished and waiting. It was carried like a burden, heavy, and always at risk of slipping from one's hands. As a boy, Sunni Ali learned early that his people lived under watch. The great Malian Empire still cast its shadow, and even as that power weakened, the habit of being looked down upon remained. Gao traded, but others decided the terms. Gao endured, but others claimed the credit. To grow up there was to understand that survival did not always mean dignity. He learned the rhythms of the river and the patience of farmers who waited for rains that did not always come. He listened to elders who spoke carefully, choosing words the way one chooses tools, aware that careless speech could bring trouble. From them, he absorbed an understanding deeper than lessons that land remembers, who stands for it, and who allows it to be taken. Sunni Ali did not grow into arrogance. He grew into alertness. Every caravan that passed through Gao reminded him of what Songhai could be, and what it was being denied. Every whispered complaint, every quiet frustration settled into him. He watched how respect shifted when power shifted, and how quickly allies became distant when weakness showed itself. What formed in him was not hunger for praise, but intolerance for humiliation. Gao taught him that strength did not need to shout, but it could not remain hidden forever. It taught him that waiting had consequences, and that patience, when demanded by others, was often just another name for control. Among his people, Sunni Ali learned who he was, not a man set apart by destiny, but one shaped by circumstance, one who understood that leadership was not about being admired, but about being willing to absorb pressure so others could breathe more freely. Before the battles, before the judgments, before the empire, there was simply a man who knew his ground, knew his people, and knew that if someone did not stand for Gao, Gao would eventually belong to someone else. That knowledge did not make him gentle. It made him ready. There comes a moment when waiting is no longer patience. It becomes permission. As Sunni Ali reached the age when responsibility could no longer be avoided, the world around Songhai began to shift in dangerous ways. The Malian Empire, once feared and unquestioned, was weakening. But weakness at the center does not bring peace to the edges. It brings predators. Timbuktu, the city of learning and trade, the spiritual heartbeat of the region, fell into the hands of the Tuareg. For outsiders, it was a change of rulers. For the people of Songhai, it was something deeper. It was the feeling of watching something sacred slip away while everyone pretended it was temporary. Inside Songhai, unity was fragile. Local leaders protected their own ground. Old rivalries resurfaced. Everyone agreed that something was wrong, but few agreed on what to do about it. Each delay made the danger worse. Sunni Ali saw clearly what others avoided. Songhai stood at a crossroads where hesitation could be fatal. If the land did not unite under one will, it would be divided by many others. History offered no mercy to scattered peoples. This was the choice placed before him, not in a ceremony, not announced by drums, but pressed into his life by circumstance. To rule gently and risk collapse, or to rule firmly and carry the weight of fear and resentment. Sunni Ali chose unity. He did not pretend the choice was clean. He understood what would be said about him. That force would be called cruelty. That discipline would be called tyranny. But he also understood something else. A broken land does not remember kindness. It remembers who failed to protect it. He moved quickly. He demanded loyalty where hesitation had once been tolerated. He crushed resistance, not out of pleasure, but out of urgency. Every decision was made with the same question in mind. Will Songhai still stand tomorrow? The cost was high. Trust gave way to obedience. Love was replaced by fear, but order returned where chaos had been growing. Roads became safer. Trade resumed. The land began to breathe again, though uneasily. Sunni Ali became a man both respected and dreaded, and he accepted that role fully. He did not ask to be loved. He asked only that Songhai survive. This was the turning point, the moment when a ruler becomes a symbol, when personal comfort is traded for collective endurance. From this choice forward, there would be no return to simplicity, no chance to be remembered as gentle, only the burden of holding a people together, while knowing that history rarely forgives those who do what is necessary instead of what is admired. Sunni Ali stood in that burden and did not step away. Power does not only test a ruler's strength, it tests his soul. As the Songhai Empire expanded under Sunni Ali, a different kind of tension began to surface. It was not carried by soldiers or settled by weapons. It lived in questions of faith, tradition, and who had the right to define what was considered proper and civilized. Timbuktu was more than a city of trade. It was a center of Islamic learning, home to scholars whose influence reached far beyond Songhai. These men believed that order came through religious law and written authority. Sunni Ali understood their value. He knew their words could bring legitimacy in the eyes of the wider world. But he also knew something they did not always acknowledge. Most of his people did not live in books or classrooms. They lived on farms, along rivers, and in villages where ancestral customs were not relics, but living guides. Sunni Ali chose not to abandon those roots. He practiced Islam, but he did not allow it to erase the spiritual systems that had sustained his people long before scholars arrived. He permitted rituals tied to land and ancestry. He protected traditions that gave soldiers courage and farmers purpose. In doing so, he drew sharp criticism. Scholars accused him of being impious. They wrote of him as a man who ruled with violence rather than righteousness. These words traveled farther than his explanations ever could. Sunni Ali knew the cost of that judgment. He accepted it anyway. To him, leadership meant guarding the whole body of his people, not just the parts that impressed outsiders. He believed that forcing one identity upon a diverse population would weaken Songhai from within. Unity, in his eyes, did not require uniformity. This choice deepened his isolation. Those who valued religious approval turned away from him. Those who depended on ancestral bonds stood closer, even if they remained silent. Sunni Ali walked between these worlds, fully welcomed by neither. History often prefers rulers who fit neatly into categories. Sunni Ali did not. He was too traditional for some, too pragmatic for others. And so his story became uncomfortable. But his decision revealed something enduring. True authority is not always about being praised. Sometimes it is about protecting what others are willing to discard. Sunni Ali chose his people over reputation. He chose continuity over applause. And in doing so, he ensured that Songhai remained a living culture, not just a name admired from a distance. It was a moral stand that would follow him long after his battles were forgotten, shaping how he would be judged, misjudged, and remembered. Strength has a cost, and it is rarely paid all at once. As the years passed, Sunni Ali carried the weight of an empire that depended on his firmness. Victory expanded Songhai's borders, but it also narrowed his world. The higher he stood, the fewer people could stand beside him without fear or expectation, shaping every word. He was obeyed more than he was understood. Among soldiers, his name inspired confidence, but not warmth. Among scholars, it stirred resentment. Among merchants, it brought opportunity mixed with caution. Everyone needed him. Few truly knew him. That distance grew wider with each decision that placed survival above comfort. Power demanded vigilance. Sunni Ali could not afford softness, not even in private. A single moment of weakness could invite rebellion, fracture alliances, or unravel years of effort. So he remained alert, always moving, always measuring the ground beneath his rule. This constant tension carved solitude into his life. Trust became rare. Praise felt dangerous. Silence felt necessary. The ruler of the largest empire in the region lived with the knowledge that peace depended on his relentless presence. He could not rest without risking everything he had built. His death reflected that reality. Sunni Ali did not die surrounded by ceremony or celebration. He died returning from a campaign, still engaged in the work of holding Songhai together. There was no gentle retreat into memory, no moment of relief. Even at the end, he remained in motion, bound to responsibility until his final breath. For some, his passing brought relief. For others, uncertainty. The empire endured, but the force that had welded it together was gone. This was the price he paid. Not comfort, not forgiveness, but the surrender of an ordinary life. Sunni Ali accepted that price without complaint. He had long understood that leaders who choose endurance over affection rarely receive gratitude in their own time. What he left behind was not admiration, but structure. Not love, but continuity. And sometimes, that is the heaviest gift a ruler can give. His story reminds us that the strongest figures in history are often the loneliest. They are remembered not for how gently they lived, but for how much they were willing to carry, so others could stand on steadier ground. History is not only shaped by those who rule. It is shaped by those who are allowed to tell the story afterward. When Sunni Ali died, the Songhai Empire did not collapse. The roads still carried trade. The cities still stood. The army still marched. But something essential had changed. The force that had held everything together through sheer will was gone. His son, Sonny Baru, inherited the throne, but not the fragile balance his father had maintained. Sonny Baru ruled with sincerity, yet he lacked one thing that had cost Sunni Ali his reputation, the trust of powerful religious scholars. Without that support, his authority weakened quickly. It did not take long before another figure stepped forward. Muhammad Turasikya, a capable general with deep ties to the Islamic scholarly community, claimed leadership. With him came a new vision of legitimacy, one grounded in religious approval and written law. Under Asikya, Songhai prospered. Learning flourished. The empire reached heights that history would later celebrate. And in order for that story to shine clearly, another story had to be dimmed. Sunni Ali became that shadow. Chroniclers emphasized his harshness. His spiritual independence was reframed as impiety. His urgency was rewritten as brutality. It was easier to praise the polished future by roughening the foundation that made it possible. Yet the truth remained unchanged beneath the words. Without Sunni Ali, there would have been no empire strong enough to inherit, no stability upon which reform could rest, no unified land ready to be guided by scholars and administrators. He had done the work that no one once remembered, the work of force, of consolidation, of survival. This is how history often behaves. It rewards those who arrive after the danger has passed, and questions those who stood in the fire long enough to make safety possible. Sunni Ali was not erased completely. He lived on in quiet memory, in the land that remained intact, in the borders that held, in the people who continued to call themselves Songhai. His legacy was not a chapter celebrated with praise. It was the ground beneath every chapter that followed. And ground, by its nature, is rarely thanked. It is simply stood upon. Time has a way of revealing what noise once tried to hide. Long after the armies moved on, and the scholars finished writing, the effects of Sunni Ali's rule remained etched into the land itself. The Songhai Empire did not survive him by accident. It survived because its foundation had been set deep enough to endure change. The trade routes he secured continued to carry wealth across the desert. The cities he protected remained centers of exchange and memory. Even as rulers changed and priorities shifted, the shape of the empire reflected the decisions of a man who believed that survival had to come before refinement. Yet, outside official records, something else endured. In villages, far from courts and libraries, people remembered Sunni Ali differently, not as a tyrant or a heretic, but as the one who refused to let Songhai be broken apart. Stories passed quietly, from elders to children, spoke less about conquest and more about resolve, about a ruler who did not ask permission to protect his people. Those memories were not written down. They did not need to be. They lived in posture, in pride, in the way people spoke of their past without apology. As centuries passed, and foreign powers later imposed their own narratives on West Africa, the deeper lesson of Sunni Ali's life became even more relevant. His story echoed in every moment when African societies were judged by standards not their own, when strength was labeled savagery and independence was framed as defiance. Sunni Ali stood as a reminder that history often misunderstands those who refuse to be shaped for approval. He did not build his empire to be admired by distant observers. He built it so his people could exist without asking who they were allowed to be. That intention outlived titles, dynasties, and borders. Today, the Songhai name still carries weight, not because the empire remains, but because the idea behind it does. The idea that African power, African order, and African identity do not require outside validation. Sunni Ali's true legacy is not found in dates or battles. It is found in the quiet confidence of a people who know they once stood tall on their own terms. And that knowledge, once planted, is very difficult to erase. In the end, the measure of a life is not found in how loudly it is praised, but in how deeply it changes what comes after. Sunni Ali did not leave behind a simple story. He left behind a difficult one. A story shaped by choices that could not please everyone, by decisions made under pressure, and by a willingness to carry blame so that others could carry on. He chose not to remain silent when silence would have been safer. He chose not to wait when waiting would have been easier. He chose not to trade the soul of his people for approval from those who would never fully accept them. These were not choices made for admiration. They were choices made for survival. History often prefers neat endings. It prefers rulers who fit cleanly into categories of good or bad, gentle or cruel. Sunni Ali fits none of those comfortably. He stands, instead, as a reminder that real leadership often lives in the gray spaces, where every path forward demands sacrifice. For the people of Songhai, his legacy was not perfection. It was possibility. The possibility of existing without asking permission. The possibility of defining strength on their own terms. The possibility of standing upright in a world that had grown accustomed to watching them bend. That spirit did not disappear when the empire fell. It traveled forward through memory, through posture, through the quiet confidence of descendants who knew their history did not begin with weakness. For those listening today, especially those whose own stories have been told by others, Sunni Ali offers something more enduring than inspiration. He offers recognition. Recognition that dignity is often defended before it is celebrated. That those who hold the line rarely receive thanks while they are standing in the fire. This is why his story still matters, not because it belongs to the past, but because it speaks to the present, to every generation that must decide whether comfort is worth the cost of erasure, to every community that understands that survival sometimes demands firmness, clarity, and an unshakable sense of self. In the quiet places where people remember who they are, his name still carries weight, not as a legend carved in stone, but as a reminder carried in spirit. History. Legends are not always gentle figures. History for sleep is not always soft and easy. African history is filled with men and women who stood firm when standing was dangerous. Historical facts may argue over details, but memory holds on to meaning. And Black history, at its core, is the story of people who refuse to disappear. Sunni Ali was one of them, and as long as stories like this are told, his decision to stand will never truly fade.